He was undisputedly the wealthiest man in the grand ballroom. Dozens of women adorned in dazzling diamonds and exquisite silk fought desperately for a single fraction of his gaze. Yet his eyes remained fixed entirely on her, a simple waitress in a plain black uniform who did not even raise her eyes to look at him. This utter lack of interest ignored him more profoundly than any woman ever had in his entire existence. And it was precisely in that quiet moment of defiance that he knew he had to understand who she was. Arthur Wright was 38 years old and possessed everything a man could ever dream of owning. He commanded a real estate empire valued at billions of dollars, lived in a sprawling penthouse with a panoramic view of the Charles River, and owned custom-engineered sports cars, whose exotic names most ordinary people could not even begin to pronounce correctly. Yet on this particular evening, as he stood within the main ballroom of the historic luxury hotel in the heart of downtown Boston, he felt just as profoundly empty as he always did. It was another charity gala, another gathering of high society, where people wore elaborate masks of elegance and benevolence, pretending that their tax-deductible financial donations were actively changing the world, while in reality, they were merely calculating their social connections and mutual benefits. Arthur understood this superficial game perfectly, because he had played it for over a decade and had won every single time. An elegant woman, draped in a striking crimson gown, the wife of an influential local politician, gently brushed her manicured hand against his tailored shoulder, laughing just a bit too loudly at a joke he had not even made. Her perfume was overwhelming and aggressive, demanding attention much like everything else in this artificial social circle. Another young woman, a blonde in a stunning emerald creation, moved to his other side, leaning inward with practiced precision so that he could clearly admire her glittering diamond necklace and the generous view beneath it. Her smile was perfectly calculated, executed with mathematical accuracy. Arthur offered a polite, practiced smile in return, nodding his head gracefully and uttering a few perfectly appropriate words of meaningless small talk. He was operating purely on autopilot, a machine that could perform these social rituals flawlessly while completely sound asleep. His weary gaze continued to wander past the wealthy crowd, watching the massive crystal chandeliers cast intricate golden reflections across the polished marble floor, while the live orchestra played a moving piece. The busy caterers glided smoothly between the elite guests, carrying heavy silver trays filled with expensive champagne flutes and delicate appetizers, and that was exactly when his wandering eyes caught sight of her. Nora Knight stood quietly at a small service table tucked away in a shadowed corner of the ballroom, meticulously arranging rows of clean crystal glasses on a dark tray. She wore the standard catering attire consisting of simple black trousers, a crisp white button-down shirt, and a tailored black vest. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly into a neat, elegant bun at the nape of her neck. She wore absolutely no makeup except for a very subtle shade of natural lipstick, and she wore no jewelry whatsoever. Yet there was something deeply captivating about the precise way she moved that immediately arrested his attention. It was a genuine grace, entirely unlearned and unartificial, a completely natural dignity, belonging to someone who was not trying to impress a single soul in the room, but was instead simply focused entirely on performing her honest day's labor. The persistent woman in the crimson dress was still talking rapidly about an upcoming art auction, but Arthur had stopped listening entirely as he stared directly at the quiet waitress. Nora lifted her heavy silver tray with practiced ease and directed her footsteps toward the far side of the crowded room. Her stride was entirely steady and calm, navigating the chaotic sea of wealthy patrons with a disciplined, discreet professionalism. She offered a gentle smile when it was genuinely necessary, maintained a respectful silence when it was appropriate, and not once throughout her entire journey did she ever look in his direction. It was a completely baffling experience for him because Arthur was thoroughly accustomed to being the absolute center of gravity in any room he entered. Women always stared openly, men looked on with deep envy, and absolutely everyone knew exactly who he was. His face appeared regularly on the covers of major business magazines, on massive city billboards, and across the evening financial news broadcasts. Yet this particular woman seemed entirely unaware of his presence. Or perhaps she noticed him and deliberately chose to ignore him, which was an idea that intrigued him far more than he cared to admit. He politely excused himself from the circle of superficial women surrounding him, murmuring a quick lie about needing a breath of fresh air, and began to make his way across the crowded marble ballroom. He did not walk directly toward her, as that would have been far too obvious for a man of his stature. So he paused occasionally along the way, conversing briefly with business associates and shaking hands with city officials. But his sharp eyes never lost sight of her for a single second. Nora eventually stopped near the main bar, setting down her empty tray to allow the bartender to replace it with a fresh one, filled to the brim with bubbling champagne glasses. She whispered something brief and quiet to the bartender, who simply nodded his head in understanding, and by then, Arthur had managed to close the physical distance between them. Just as Nora turned around carefully with her heavy tray, she almost collided directly with his broad chest. Their eyes met instantly in a brief, silent clash. Her eyes were a deep, dark brown, visibly exhausted from hours of standing, but remarkably intelligent and entirely uninterested in him. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a quiet, even voice, immediately stepping to the side to clear his path, without a single trace of hesitation. "No, it was entirely my fault. Please excuse me," Arthur replied quickly, his voice carrying a rare note of genuine urgency. "I simply was not watching where I was going." She offered a polite, professional nod of her head and instantly moved past him into the crowd, leaving him behind without a second thought. She had simply walked away from him. Arthur stood completely frozen in place, utterly dumbfounded by the brief interaction. Did she truly possess absolutely no idea who he was, or did she know his identity perfectly well and choose to treat him like an invisible ghost for that exact reason? For the remaining hour of the charity gala, he tried desperately to catch her eyes again, intentionally standing directly within her field of vision, walking past her service station 3 separate times, and even taking a champagne glass directly from her tray as she glided by. Nothing worked. She merely offered the exact same polite, detached professional smile she gave to every other guest, before instantly returning to her demanding duties. It felt completely absurd to him that Arthur Wright, a man who could command the construction of massive skyscrapers with a single gesture of his hand, could not manage to secure the fleeting attention of a working waitress. Toward the very end of the long evening, he watched her slip quietly through a heavy side exit door alongside the rest of the kitchen staff. She removed her serving vest and pulled on a worn, faded winter coat that had seen far better days. The sudden impulse that took hold of him was entirely foolish, and he knew it, but he found himself following her out into the chilly night anyway. Outside the luxury hotel, a biting winter wind was howling through the streets of Boston, swirling light dust across the concrete pavement. Nora stood quietly at a nearby public transit stop, her eyes focused intently on the printed bus schedule. Arthur stopped his footsteps a few meters behind her, suddenly overcome with an unfamiliar wave of insecurity, completely unsure of what he should say or what he was even trying to achieve by being there. Within a few minutes, the large city bus pulled up to the curb with a loud hiss of brakes. Nora stepped onto the vehicle without a single backward glance, and Arthur was left standing entirely alone on the empty, freezing street corner, watching the red taillights of the bus slowly disappear into the distant city traffic. For the first time in a very long period of life, he had absolutely no idea what his next move should be. For the first time in years, someone had completely escaped his absolute control, and that unfamiliar sensation was proving to be just as deeply frustrating as it was exhilarating. He slowly walked back inside the warm hotel, where the gala was finally drawing to a close, watching people bid each other farewell, exchange expensive business cards, and plan their next corporate meetings. Arthur walked directly over to the main event manager, who was supervising the cleanup. "That catering and waitress crew working the floor tonight, where exactly are they from?" Arthur questioned, catching the manager completely off guard. The event manager hesitated for a moment, visibly surprised by the unusual inquiry from a primary donor. "They are contracted from a premium local catering agency, Mr. Wright. We have worked with their management for several years. I need the specific name of one of the waitresses who worked the Eastern tables tonight," Arthur stated flatly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Brown hair, pulled into a bun, roughly her late 20s. The manager looked immediately uncomfortable and anxious, shifting his weight. "Mr. Wright, I am afraid that sharing personal employee information violates our strict privacy protocols." Arthur calmly reached into his tailored suit, pulled out his leather wallet, and extracted his personal business card along with 5 crisp $100 bills, placing them firmly on the table between them. "Her name. I expect it in my email inbox by tomorrow morning." The manager looked at the substantial money, swallowed hard, and discreetly pocketed the bills. "Of course, Mr. Wright. I will look into the registry immediately." That night, Arthur did not sleep a single wink. He sat quietly in a leather chair by the massive panoramic window of his dark penthouse, staring out at the countless glittering lights of the Boston skyline, thinking entirely of a woman who did not even care to look at him. But he was certain she would look eventually, because Arthur Wright always obtained exactly what he wanted. Always. Nora Knight woke up at precisely 6 o'clock in the morning, just as she did every single day of her life. Her small, cramped apartment, located in an older building in South Boston, was freezing cold because the radiator unit worked terribly, and she forced herself to save money on every single utility bill she could manage. She rose from her bed with extreme quietness, taking great care not to make a sound that could wake up her daughter. She walked softly into the adjacent room, gently pushing open the creaking wooden door a few inches to peer inside. Her 7-year-old daughter, Zoe, was sleeping soundly, curled tightly into a ball while hugging a worn plush bear. The little girl was dressed in thick, warm pajamas, and Nora had carefully draped an additional heavy wool blanket over the bed to keep her warm. Nora always ensured that Zoe possessed everything she truly needed to be comfortable and happy, even if it meant that she herself had to sacrifice nearly every personal comfort and luxury in life. In the small kitchen, she boiled a small pot of water on the stove to make a cup of cheap black tea, slicing a single piece of plain bread and spreading a tiny bit of sweet jam over it. That would be more than enough to sustain her for the morning. In exactly 3 hours, she would need to be at the local elementary school to pick Zoe up early, and then they would sit down together to enjoy a proper, nutritious lunch. Yesterday afternoon, she had cooked a massive pot of chicken soup that would easily last them for the next 2 days. Suddenly, her old cell phone vibrated violently against the laminate kitchen counter. It was a text message from the manager of the catering agency. It stated that there was a corporate event scheduled for this evening at the Boston Museum of Science, starting at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening, requiring the standard uniform, and asked her to confirm her availability immediately. Nora typed a response rapidly, confirming she would take the shift. It was another job, and that was a very good thing, because every single dollar counted toward her secret savings. She still needed to accumulate exactly $12,000 to afford the specialized medical surgery that Zoe desperately required. The hospital doctors had assured her that the corrective orthopedic procedure could wait a little longer, and was not an immediate life-and-death emergency. But Nora watched her beloved daughter limp slightly when she walked, and she saw the cruel way other children stared at her on the playground. $12,000 sounded like an absolute fortune to a single mother, but she was entirely determined to gather it somehow through sheer hard work. Zoe woke up at 7:30 in the morning, full of bright laughter and sweet energy, despite the chilly air of the apartment. Nora helped her daughter dress carefully, gently brushing her long, fair hair into neat braids before serving her a small bowl of breakfast cereal. "Mom, today is the big day. Our class goes on the field trip to the city zoo," Zoe exclaimed happily between bites of her food. "I remember, my sweet girl," Nora replied with a warm smile, kissing the top of her head. "Your teacher said you must bring your thick jacket because it will be quite cold outside today." "I will wear it, Mom. And I hope we get to see the penguins swimming, Zoe said, her eyes shining with pure excitement. Nora smiled gently at her daughter's enthusiasm. Zoe always possessed an incredible ability to find immense joy in the smallest, most ordinary things in life. It was a beautiful trait to witness, but it was also deeply painful for Nora, because she knew exactly how much her innocent child was missing out on due to her own past mistakes. Zoe's biological father had vanished completely the exact moment he discovered Nora was pregnant 7 long years ago. Nora had been only 22 years old at the time, deeply in love, incredibly naive, and foolishly trusting of empty romantic promises. She had believed every single word he said, only to be left entirely alone, without a stable job, and without any support from her own family. Her strict parents had officially disowned her the moment she chose to keep the pregnancy, leaving her to survive entirely on her own in the city. She had learned how to survive the hard way. After dropping Zoe off at her school, Nora returned to the quiet apartment to spend her day cleaning, doing laundry, and preparing dinner. It was a simple, exhausting life, but it was entirely honest. In the late afternoon, she picked up her daughter, listening to Zoe talk endlessly about the penguins and bears they had seen. In the evening, dressed in her clean catering uniform, Nora arrived at the Museum of Science. It was a corporate event for a prominent technology firm, filled with people in expensive suits and artificial smiles. Nora was arranging champagne glasses on her tray when she suddenly felt the intense weight of someone staring directly at her. She turned her head slowly and saw him again. It was the exact same wealthy man from the charity gala, tall with dark hair slightly touched with silver at the temples, wearing a flawless custom suit. He was staring directly at her. Nora's heart beat rapidly in her chest. This was absolutely not a coincidence. It could not be. She forced herself to look away, picking up her heavy tray to serve the nearby guests, but she could feel his eyes tracking her every movement throughout the entire evening. He attempted to approach her 3 separate times, but each time Nora found a clever professional excuse to move away, replacing empty glasses or taking a new order. Toward the end of the event, as she carried her final empty tray into the quiet employee back room, she heard a deep voice speak directly behind her. "Excuse me, please." Nora froze completely in her tracks. She slowly turned around to face him. He was standing in the doorway with his hands tucked into his pockets, his facial expression remarkably uncertain. It was a strange sight, because men of his immense wealth never looked uncertain. "Yes?" she said coldly, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "I am Arthur," he said simply, pausing as if his prominent name alone should mean something to her. Nora remained entirely silent, refusing to offer any reaction. "I saw you yesterday evening at the gala," he continued. "I was working there," she responded dryly. "I work in many different places across this city." "I noticed that," he said, a small, genuine smile appearing on his face. "I wanted to invite you to get a cup of coffee with me, just to talk for a little while." Nora felt a familiar, sharp spark of anger flare up inside her chest. "I am not interested in coffee," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the quiet room. "Nor am I interested in having conversations with wealthy men who deliberately follow waitresses to their jobs." His smile vanished instantly. "I am not stalking you, I promise." "Really? Yesterday evening I was working at the hotel gala. Tonight, you just happened to be here at a completely different venue. That is a very convenient coincidence." He hesitated, and in that brief silence, Nora saw the absolute truth. "Listen to me, sir," she said quietly, but with absolute firmness. "I do not care who you are or what game you are playing, but I am entirely uninterested. I am a simple waitress. I work grueling hours to feed my daughter. That is the entire story." "You have a daughter?" he asked softly. "Yes, she is 7 years old. And before you ask, no, there is no father. No, I do not require any male financial support, and I do not want anyone's pity or charity. Please leave me alone." She turned her back to walk away. "I am truly sorry," he said quickly behind her. "I really am. I did not mean to offend you in any way. It is just that I have not met anyone so completely real in a very long time. Nora stopped her footsteps, but she refused to turn around to face him. Real? She let out a bitter, mocking laugh. You do not even know me. That is exactly why I wanted to talk to you. To actually know you. Why? Because I do not look at you with wide eyes like everyone else in your wealthy world? Nora finally turned around, looking him dead in the eyes. Because to me, you are absolutely nobody. You are just another wealthy guest at an expensive event. Perhaps you are incredibly important to other people. Perhaps you have millions of dollars, but I do not care. I am exhausted. I want to go home, hug my little girl, and sleep. My life is simple, and there is absolutely no room in it for your passing amusement. Arthur looked as if he had just been struck across the face, and perhaps that was exactly what he needed. You are entirely right, he finally murmured quietly. I apologize. My behavior was completely inappropriate. He nodded his head respectfully and turned to walk out of the back room. Nora stood entirely alone for a long moment, fighting against a strange, heavy sensation in her chest that lingered between relief and a strange disappointment. 3 weeks passed by in a flash. Arthur did not appear at a single catering event Nora worked, and her life continued exactly as it always had, moving between hotels, conferences, and private dinners. Yet occasionally, she caught herself looking across the crowded rooms, searching for his familiar tall silhouette. She scolded herself for being foolish. Zoe had another checkup with her specialist, who confirmed that the surgery was necessary to prevent long-term damage, but the waiting list for public assistance was 18 months long. To do it privately would cost $12,000. Nora simply nodded, thanking the doctor before walking home with Zoe, her mind entirely consumed by the crushing numbers. On Saturday, Nora was working a lavish wedding at a luxury restaurant right on the edge of the Charles River. It was a massive affair with over 200 wealthy guests. Around midnight, she stepped into the quiet kitchen back room to rest her aching feet, closing her eyes for a brief moment of peace. Suddenly, she opened them to see Arthur standing near the doorway. This time, he looked completely different. He wore no expensive suit, just ordinary jeans, a dark knit sweater, and a simple leather jacket. He looked younger, more human. You again? Nora sighed, straightening her posture. I thought I made myself perfectly clear. You did, he replied calmly, taking a slow step forward. But I could not stop thinking about what you said to me. You were entirely right. I was arrogant, and I behaved like someone who believes money can open every closed door. I want you to know that I am not a bored rich man looking for a brief amusement. I am simply a man who met a woman who completely fascinated him, and I truly want to know her as a human being. Why? Nora asked flatly. Because you are the first person in years who looks at me and sees a human being rather than a corporate bank account. Nora let out a dry, sarcastic laugh. Do you have any idea how dramatic that sounds? I know, he admitted with a faint smile. But it is the absolute truth. Nora took a deep, weary breath. Listen to me. Do you have any real idea what it is like to work 14 hours a day, counting every single penny? To lie to your innocent child that everything is perfect when you barely have enough to pay rent? To be abandoned because someone decided you weren't good enough? Arthur remained silent, a soft look of genuine understanding appearing in his eyes. I do not know what that feels like, he admitted softly. I truly do not, and that is exactly why I want to know you, because you understand a reality of life that I have never experienced. My reality is not a curiosity for you to study, Nora said sharply. I am not a lesson in humility to make a wealthy man feel better about himself. That is not what I want. Then what do you want? Just you, to know you. Nora shook her head. I cannot do this. My daughter already lost a father once. I will never allow her to become attached to someone who will simply vanish in a few months when he becomes bored of this game. And what if I do not vanish? Everyone vanishes eventually. Those heavy words hung in the silence between them. Arthur stared at her for a long time, deeply considering her words. I understand, he finally said. I will not disturb you anymore." He turned toward the exit. "Wait," Nora said suddenly, the word escaping her mouth before she could stop it. He paused, turning back. "If you truly want to know me, then stop showing up at the events where I am working. It is incredibly embarrassing and unprofessional for me." "Then how?" he asked, a spark of hope in his eyes. "I don't know. Normally?" Arthur smiled gently. "Normally, I can do that. Can I buy you a coffee this weekend?" Nora hesitated, every logical part of her brain screaming that this was a terrible mistake, but his eyes looked so entirely sincere. "One single coffee," she stated strictly. "In a highly public place. If you do anything inappropriate, it is over forever. Do not call it a date. Do not buy me flowers, and do not make any grand gestures. I promise. Saturday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at the historic cafe in Back Bay. Does that work?" Nora nodded. "Do not be late. I have exactly 1 hour before I must pick up my daughter." She turned back to her work, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged her tray, wondering what on earth she had just done. Saturday arrived far quicker than Nora anticipated. She stood in front of her small bedroom mirror, trying on a third shirt, but all of them were old and faded from being washed hundreds of times. "Mom, you look absolutely beautiful," Zoe called out from the living room. Nora smiled, deciding to stick with a simple black shirt and ordinary jeans. She left Zoe under the watchful care of Mrs. Janet, a kind elderly neighbor who often helped watch the little girl when Nora had to work extra shifts. The Back Bay Cafe was packed with people when Nora walked through the doors at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Arthur was already there, sitting quietly at a corner table. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, looking entirely ordinary without his usual armor of wealth. He stood up immediately when he saw her approach. "You came," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "I kept my promise," Nora replied dryly, sitting down across from him. They ordered 2 plain black coffees and sat in a brief, awkward silence. "Thank you for coming," Arthur said softly. "Stop thanking me. It feels incredibly strange," Nora said. They began to talk, and although Arthur tried to appear relaxed, Nora could see the tension in his shoulders. "You are nervous," she observed. "A little bit," he admitted, "because I really do not want to ruin this opportunity." They spent the next hour talking about books, the city, and the realities of life. Arthur spoke openly about the crushing pressure of running a massive real estate empire and the loneliness of being surrounded by fake friends, while Nora spoke of her love for Zoe and the dreams she had long buried. He wasn't the arrogant billionaire she expected. He was surprisingly human. "I must leave now," Nora said, checking her watch as the hour concluded. "Zoe is waiting for me." Arthur paid for the coffee before she could protest, and they walked out onto the bustling street. "This was nice," Nora admitted reluctantly. "Can we do this again?" Arthur asked quickly. Nora hesitated for a moment. "We will see," she said with a faint smile, before walking away into the crowd. A week later, Nora took Zoe to the hospital for a routine orthopedic checkup. The doctor called Nora into his private office with a strange expression on his face. "Mrs. Knight, I have incredible news. A spot has opened up for Zoe's surgery next month at a premium private clinic. Everything has been completely paid for in full by an anonymous donor." Nora froze entirely, her heart dropping. "What? That is impossible. The paperwork arrived yesterday, including all post-operative physical therapy. Zoe will be completely healed." Nora walked out of the clinic in a complete daze, and a fierce wave of anger exploded inside her chest. She knew instantly who had done it. Arthur. She called his corporate office, demanding to speak with him, until his secretary finally connected the call. "Nora?" Arthur's calm voice answered. "How dare you?" Nora yelled, tears of absolute fury streaming down her face. "How dare you do this? I told you explicitly that I did not want your charity." "Nora, please. I just wanted to help your daughter." "I do not care what you wanted. Did you think you could just buy me and my daughter's health? Did you think this would make me obligated to you? You threw a check at the problem, just like you do with everything else in your privileged life. You took away my choice, my dignity. I saw how much you were struggling, Nora. I saw the deep pain in your eyes, and I wanted to take it away. Arthur shouted back, his own voice cracking. You had absolutely no right to interfere in my life. I had the right to help a woman I genuinely care about, Arthur exclaimed. Nora went completely silent. You care about me? You have known me for a few weeks. We had a single cup of coffee. And you think you can enter my life and fix me like I am one of your charity projects? This is a classic story of a rich man saving a poor waitress to make himself feel superior. Nora, please. That is not true. I do not want this, Arthur. Cancel it immediately. I cannot. The documents are legally signed, and the medical procedure is scheduled. It is already happening. Nora sobbed openly, feeling completely helpless. How could you do this to me? She whispered brokenly before hanging up the phone. She sat with Zoe that night, watching her daughter cry tears of pure joy at the news that she would finally be able to run like the other children. And Nora felt completely torn between absolute gratitude for her child's future and a deep sense of betrayal. A full month passed by, and Nora refused to speak to Arthur, blocking his phone number entirely. Zoe underwent the surgery, and the doctors declared it a perfect success, assuring Nora that her daughter would walk without a limp within a few months of therapy. Nora threw herself back into her exhausting routine of work and caregiving, but a strange, empty quietness lingered in her mind. 2 months after the surgery, a plain white envelope without a return address arrived in her mailbox. Inside was a letter written in elegant, hurried handwriting. It read, Nora, I know you do not want to hear from me, and I know I made a massive mistake. I am not writing to make excuses, but I want you to understand why I did it. My entire life, I have solved every problem by writing a check. I never realized that by taking away a person's struggles, I was also stripping them of their dignity and their choice. You were the first person to ever tell me that to my face. But when I heard about Zoe's pain, I could not bear it. I acted out of impulse because I had the financial means to stop a child's suffering. But I completely ignored your feelings in the process, and for that, I am deeply sorry. I am not asking for your forgiveness or trying to win you back. I just want you to know that you taught me that the most valuable things in life, trust, respect, and love, cannot be bought with a checkbook. I wish you and Zoe nothing but happiness. Arthur. Nora read the letter 3 times, her tears blurring the ink. She was deeply moved by his genuine humility. The following weekend, Nora found herself sitting alone at the exact same Back Bay cafe, staring out the window. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her table. She looked up to see Arthur standing there, looking visibly thinner and exhausted. Nora, I am so sorry, I didn't know you were here. I can leave immediately, he said nervously. No, Nora said quickly. Please, sit down. He sat across from her, his eyes filled with anxiety. I read your letter, she said softly. Zoe is doing wonderful. She is already walking without pain. Thank you. It was your strength that got her through it, Arthur said quietly. Nora looked at him intently. I was furious with you, and I am still hurt by how you handled it. But I understand why you did it. If we are ever to be friends, you must promise to never try to save me again. I am not a project to be transformed. I don't want to change a single thing about you, Nora. Then prove it to me. Accept my simple life exactly as it is. Arthur took a deep breath. I will give you all the time and space you need, Nora. Just let me be your friend. Nora agreed to give him one single chance, with absolute boundaries. Arthur kept his word perfectly over the next 2 weeks, sending only brief, respectful texts, checking on Zoe's health, without expecting anything in return. Gradually, the icy wall around Nora's heart began to melt, and they met for coffee twice more, sharing real details about their lives. But a dark storm was brewing. Nora arrived at the luxury hotel for her usual shift, and the manager called her into his office with a grim expression. Mrs. Knight, we have a severe problem. Guests in Suite 218 have reported that a valuable diamond necklace and a large sum of cash have vanished from their room. You were seen cleaning that floor yesterday morning. Nora gasped in absolute shock. That is impossible. I have never stolen a single thing in my life. I am sorry, but until the police investigation is complete, you are officially suspended." Within hours, the catering agency called her to say they could no longer employ her due to the massive reputational risk. By the end of the day, Nora had lost every single source of income, and she sat at her kitchen table in despair, wondering how she would pay rent. Suddenly, her phone rang from an unknown number. Nora, a wealthy young female voice, laughed over the line. "Congratulations on trapping Arthur Wright. You actually thought you were special to him." "Who is this?" Nora demanded. "It doesn't matter, but you should know that Arthur has a collection of poor waitresses and maids he likes to save just to feel like a hero. Ask him about Maeve, Catherine, or Audrey. They all thought he loved them before he abandoned them. And as for your job at the hotel, I am the one who told the manager you were a thief. I destroyed your reputation because Arthur belonged to me before you appeared." The call disconnected, leaving Nora trembling with horror and doubt. Desperate for money to feed Zoe, Nora took a night shift job at a dangerous, shady nightclub on the absolute outskirts of Boston. On her very first night, at 3 o'clock in the morning, a heavily intoxicated male customer grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her toward him. "Come on, sweetheart, let's go somewhere private." "I'll pay you double," he growled. "Let go of me!" Nora screamed, trying to wrench her wrist free. Suddenly, a strong hand grabbed the man from behind, slamming him to the floor. It was Arthur, his face filled with pure rage, as security guards rushed in to drag the drunk man out. Nora stood panting heavily, her eyes wide. "What are you doing here?" she screamed at Arthur. "I hired security to watch over you because I knew this place was dangerous," Arthur shouted back desperately. Nora let out a hysterical laugh. "You hired security. You are doing it again. Controlling me, tracking my life." "Nora, I couldn't let you get hurt. I am leaving, Arthur. I am leaving this job. I am leaving this city. And I am leaving your life forever. A woman called me and told me all about your past rescue projects. Maeve, Catherine, Audrey. I am packing my bags and taking Zoe back to the countryside in Worcester." Tears streamed down her face as she ran out into the cold night, leaving Arthur standing entirely alone in the neon lights of the club. Nora spent the rest of the night sitting on a cold bench near the Charles River, watching the sun rise over the water, feeling completely broken. When she returned home at 7 o'clock in the morning, she found Zoe waiting for her. Nora hugged her daughter tight, crying quietly. For days, she tried to find any manual labor job, washing windows and distributing flyers in the freezing cold, but the rumors had spread everywhere, and everyone refused to hire her. Finally, she received another desperate text from Arthur, begging her to meet him for just 1 hour at the Boston Public Garden near the Chopin Monument to hear the truth. Nora agreed, driven by a desperate need for answers. They sat on a snowy bench in the freezing park. Arthur looked completely disheveled and heartbroken. "Maeve, Catherine, and Audrey are real," he began quietly, "but it is not what you think. Maeve was a maid in my office whose husband was abusive. I paid for her legal divorce and a safe shelter. Catherine was a student facing eviction. I gave her an academic scholarship. Audrey worked for my mother, and I helped her secure a loan for a cafe. There were never any romances. I was just trying to help people." "Then why did that woman lie to me and destroy my jobs?" Nora asked. Arthur took a deep, painful breath. "Because my mother ordered her to do it. Hannah Wright, my mother, is the one who orchestrated this entire nightmare to tear us apart and force me into an arranged marriage with a wealthy heiress named Catherine Newman." Nora gasped in absolute horror. "Your own mother did this to me?" "Yes, and I confronted her yesterday. I told her that if she ever touches your life again, I will legally renounce my family name, give up my inheritance, and walk away from the empire forever, because you mean far more to me than all the wealth in the world. Nora, I love you." The words hung beautifully in the winter air. Nora stared at him, her eyes filling with tears of shock. "Arthur, this is too fast, too complicated." "I know," he said softly, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a official legal envelope. This is a legitimate job offer to be the corporate event coordinator for my hospitality branch. It is a real position, based entirely on your incredible organization skills. There will be a formal interview process. It pays a proper salary, 3 times what you made as a waitress. I am offering you a fair chance, not a handout. Nora opened the envelope, reading the official contract with trembling hands. "And what happens to us?" she whispered. "That is entirely up to you. I will be your boss, your friend, or nothing at all. I will wait for you forever." Nora looked into his eyes and saw nothing but absolute honesty. She accepted the job under the strict condition that their relationship remain purely professional, until she was ready. Nora started her new corporate career 2 weeks later, working tirelessly to organize major events. Arthur kept his promise flawlessly, treating her with absolute professional distance, though their eyes often met across the busy office. 3 months later, Nora successfully organized the largest high society charity gala of the year, with over 200 elite guests in attendance. In the middle of the keynote speeches, the heavy doors opened and Hannah Wright walked into the room, covered in diamonds and expensive furs. She marched straight onto the main stage, grabbing the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hannah announced coldly, pointing a finger directly at Nora. "The woman who organized this lovely evening, Nora Knight, is nothing but a former low-class waitress and a suspected hotel thief who has seduced my billionaire son to claw her way into our fortune." A wave of shocking murmurs rippled through the wealthy crowd. Nora stood paralyzed with humiliation, as hundreds of eyes stared at her with deep scorn. Suddenly, Arthur stepped onto the stage, standing firmly between Nora and his mother. "That is enough!" Arthur's voice boomed through the speakers. He turned to face the entire crowd. "Nora Knight is the most honorable, brilliant woman I have ever known. She was falsely accused of theft by my own mother, who used her immense power to maliciously destroy this innocent woman's life because she couldn't control us. Nora earned her executive position through pure talent and hard work. And if anyone in this room has a problem with a hard-working single mother rising to success, the flaw belongs to you, not her." Hannah turned pale with fury. "How dare you humiliate your own family publicly for this waitress? I love this woman," Arthur declared boldly to the entire room. "And I am officially walking away from the Wright fortune, the family company, and everything you control today. Because Nora taught me what true value means, something your money will never be able to buy." He turned to Nora, holding out his hand. Nora looked at his outstretched hand, tears streaming down her face, and made her choice. She stepped forward and took his hand tightly, turning her back on high society as the room erupted into chaos. The next morning, the city newspapers and tabloids exploded, with scandalous headlines. "Billionaire deserts empire for working-class waitress." Nora faced a barrage of reporters outside her apartment, and Zoe came home from school crying because the other children were repeating the cruel rumors. Arthur arrived at her kitchen that evening, looking tired but completely at peace. "Nora, the media pressure will not stop as long as we are vulnerable. I want you to marry me. Not just to protect your name, but because I want to build a real life with you and be a true father to Zoe." Nora agreed, but insisted on a tiny wedding without media and a strict prenuptial agreement to prove to the world that she didn't care about his money. 3 weeks later, they were married in a tiny, private room at City Hall. The only attendees were Nora, Arthur, Zoe, a co-worker, and kind old Mrs. Janet, who wept tears of pure joy. Nora wore a simple white dress from a local shop, and Arthur wore a plain dark suit. There were no expensive flowers or grand orchestras, but the love in the room was entirely real. Afterward, they enjoyed a quiet lunch of traditional pies at a small local diner. "Mom, is Arthur my real dad now?" Zoe asked happily. Arthur knelt down, hugging the little girl tightly with tears in his eyes. "I promise to be the absolute best father I can be for the rest of my life, Zoe," he whispered. They moved into a modest 3-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Brookline. The first year of marriage was incredibly difficult. Arthur's new independent business faced a severe crisis due to his mother's corporate boycott, and Nora worked long overtime hours to help him rebuild his reputation from the ground up. But they faced every struggle hand in hand, and their bond grew stronger with every passing month. Arthur proved to be an incredible father, helping Zoe with her schoolwork and reading her bedtime stories every single night. Exactly 1 year after their wedding, a soft knock sounded on their apartment door on a freezing winter evening. Arthur opened the door to find his mother, Hannah, standing on the threshold. She wore no jewelry or makeup, and she looked significantly older and deeply broken. "Arthur, Nora, please, may I come in?" she whispered. They sat in the modest living room in a tense silence. "I came to beg for your forgiveness." Hannah wept openly, looking at Nora. "I have spent the last year watching you from afar. I saw how hard you worked to support my son during his financial ruin, and I saw how beautifully you raise your daughter. I realized that my wealth had blinded me to what truly matters." Arthur did not need money or a high society status. He needed real love, and you gave him that. I am so deeply sorry for the pain I caused. Arthur walked over and wrapped his arms tightly around his crying mother, and Nora joined them, letting go of the past. 5 years later, a beautiful winter morning dawned over their peaceful home in Brookline. The delightful aroma of fresh coffee and holiday pastries filled the warm kitchen. Nora stood by the counter, carefully rolling out dough for gingerbread cookies, her belly beautifully rounded with their third child. A wonderful, unexpected blessing. "Mom, can I please help you cut out the star shapes?" Zoe asked. She was now a bright, beautiful 13-year-old teenager, walking completely normally, without a single trace of her past limp. "Of course, my sweet girl," Nora smiled, kissing her cheek. In the living room, their 4-year-old son Michael was happily building a massive tower out of wooden blocks. Arthur was kneeling right beside him on the rug, patiently showing the little boy how to properly reinforce the base. "Remember, Michael," Arthur said softly, his voice full of warmth. "Sometimes in life, things will fall apart, and you have to clear away the ruins and start building all over again from the ground up. That is exactly how the strongest things are made." Nora watched them from the kitchen, her heart overflowing with absolute happiness. Arthur had successfully rebuilt a smaller, far more ethical real estate firm that focused on creating affordable housing for working families, and he was a deeply respected man. Hannah visited them every single weekend, transforming into a doting, loving grandmother who loved to bake sweet treats for the children. That afternoon, the entire family went for a long walk through the snow-covered paths of the Boston Public Garden. Arthur held Nora's hand tightly as the children ran ahead, laughing as they caught falling snowflakes. They paused near the historic monument, where they had shared their first honest conversation years ago. "Did you ever imagine our life would look like this, Arthur?" Nora asked softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Never," Arthur replied, looking at her with eyes full of deep devotion. "I used to think that success was measured by the height of my skyscrapers and the numbers in my bank accounts. Now I know that true success is simply walking through the winter snow with the family that loves me. You saved me, Nora. We saved each other," Nora whispered, pulling him into a tender, loving kiss as the snow fell softly around them. Looking back across the long, winding tapestry of existence, one begins to understand that the true measure of a human life is never found in the grand spectacles, the hollow applause of high society, or the accumulation of material fortunes that eventually fade into dust. True wealth is a quiet, enduring thing, woven slowly over time through the small, seemingly insignificant choices we make every single day, to choose honesty over ease, dignity over pride, and love over fear. We often spend the frantic years of our youth chasing after illusions of security, building massive walls of wealth or status to protect ourselves from the inherent vulnerability of being human, only to realize later in life that the most beautiful things can only grow when those artificial walls are entirely torn down. It takes a remarkable amount of courage to stand before another soul in absolute truth, stripped of all armor, and say that we are willing to be seen exactly as we are, imperfect, struggling, but profoundly real. Pride is a heavy, isolating burden that many carry until their final days, mistakenly believing that asking for help or admitting a mistake is a sign of weakness, when in reality, true humility is the absolute highest form of human strength. Forgiveness is not a sudden, singular event, but a slow and difficult bridge that we must choose to walk across day after day, clearing away the sharp stones of past betrayals to allow grace to finally heal what was once completely broken. The bond of a true family is not defined merely by blood or shared names, but by the fierce, unwavering commitment to stand firmly by one another's side through the fiercest winter storms and the most painful public trials, refusing to let go when the world demands that we abandon our values. When an elder looks back upon the decades they have left behind, they do not remember the expensive garments they wore or the luxurious rooms they occupied. Rather, their mind drifts fondly to the sound of children's laughter echoing through a modest kitchen, the warm touch of a faithful hand held tightly in the quiet dark, and the profound peace of knowing they lived an honest life, filled with genuine purpose. Love is not a fleeting fairy tale or a passing whim of youth, but a daily, conscious decision to cherish, respect, and protect another human being in their darkest hours, just as much as in their brightest moments. In the grand design of this world, the most enduring legacy we can ever leave behind is the love we gave, the dignity we preserved, and the quiet home we built with an open, authentic heart.